Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'm in front of the camera. So for this new year, I feel really compelled to try something different with my content. This is going to be supplemental. It's not going to be replacing my gallery walkthroughs and museum walkthroughs and things. Those take, as you can imagine, a really long time to put together. And I love that storytelling aspect of it. I love putting together, my voiceover and stuff like that. But I also wanted to have something that was more unstructured and behind the scenes, kind of like a rough cut where I share my thoughts and opinions and feelings more about things as opposed to just sort of laying out the landscape and letting you all come to your own conclusions. So just wanted to set some context around what these types of videos are going to be. Let me know if you like this format. I mean, be nice, of course. Only give constructive criticism. But yeah, I just thought we would try this year, and hopefully this means I can also get out more videos for you all, just because these take a little bit less time. But the caveat of that, of course, is they are more unstructured. I'm sure I will pronounce names incorrectly and mess up details at various points, but I'm gonna do the best to my ability and we'll just go from there. So I hope you all enjoy this, but I thought, given that it's January, I would take the opportunity to walk through my year in review of everything that I saw in 2024. It is never lost on me all of the incredible things that I'm able to see year after year after year, to live in an incredible city like New York City, that is the art hub, but also to travel to all of these other art hubs like London and LA and Mexico City and Venice and Paris. And yeah, I have just like a few highlights I want to walk through from 2024 before I jump into my thoughts kind of about each month and pull out some of my favorite things from each month. Also, given that I'm covering a whole year, this will probably be 2 videos because I mean, I could talk about this stuff forever and this video could be days long, but even when I edit it down, I think it'll be long enough to be at least 2 videos. So just prefacing with that, but yeah, highlights for the year. I think last year for me, not to get into like too many personal details, but last year was a lot of like firsts for me in many ways, a lot of experiencing things that I never experienced before, whether that be emotionally or even physically, visiting places that I had never been to before. And so that was very exciting. It's also very scary, and you kind of take a gamble and a chance when you push yourself outside of your comfort zone to do things like that. But ultimately, I had some really incredible experiences. I had it very much on my list this year to go to Chicago and experience the Chicago art scene. The Chicago Expo team has always been really generous with extending an invite to me, and every year I just can't quite make it fit into my schedule. For most of you guys know this, but this is just something I do for fun on the side. I would like to do this full time one day, but for now, this is just something that I fit into my spare time. And so I really have to be really cutthroat with my schedule, unfortunately. And I made it a priority to go to Chicago this year because I wanted to see the galleries and the scene and the museums and the fair. And I'm so happy that I got to do that. I was so impressed with the fair, of course, but also the institutions, the Museum of Contemporary Art, the Chicago Art Institute, but also the gallery scene. There's quite a large number, given, that it's not New York and that it's not LA, of galleries there with really high quality shows. And I just hope to see that scene continue to grow and new galleries to start. And it's not surprising given the art schools there, that's so incredible. But yeah, it was just nice. It's nice to see these little pockets of art communities outside of just like, New York and LA, basically. So that was really great. And a surprise visit, which was a first for me, was going to Stockholm. So I had never been to Sweden even, so that was a great surprise. And the art scene there is incredible. Again, so many wonderful galleries, very easy to visit and see. They're clustered in really convenient ways where lots of galleries are located next to one another in certain neighborhoods. And the fair was so impressive. I just loved that team. They were so generous to me as well. And so that was a great experience. And Stockholm is so beautiful just as a city. So that was wonderful. So yeah, I don't think I'll be able to travel as much this year, but who knows? I really was lucky to be able to travel a lot this last year. So those are some highlights, some personal highlights for me. Other highlights would be certain pieces that I procured for my collection. I want to start sharing kind of little highlights of my collection with you all. It's something that is newer. I've only been collecting the last 5 years just because I am on the younger side and I wasn't really able to financially start doing that until about 5 years ago. But now I feel like I've really built up, am starting to build up and will continue to build up my collection. So I want to start sharing a little bit more of that with you all. But I was able to procure a couple of great pieces last year that I had my, again, eyes set on. Jana Schroeder in particular was one that I really wanted a Jana Schroeder work for so many years, and everything just kind of fell into place this past year. So that was wonderful. And then of course, meeting you guys like that, not to sound cheesy, but it's always wonderful when you create works online. I feel like you put things out into a void almost. And obviously when you comment lovely things and stuff, that's great. But like, it's just different when I see you all in person, and artists as well. When I'm able to meet artists and they can tell me what my work means to them, that's really special and very rewarding. So just kind of helps me continue to feel motivated to do what I do. So everyone that said hello and, you know, anything to me at a fair or an exhibit or just like on the streets, I really appreciate it. And it really does make a big difference and it always makes my day. So thank you for that. But that is enough rambling. Let's get into it. Otherwise, this video will be hours and hours long. So let's start with January. I will be referencing notes on my phone. So if you're wondering what's going on here, that's what I'm doing. As much as I'm going to try to pull things out of my brain, it's also nice to just write things down so I don't miss stuff. But there's not a ton that I want to call out in January. January is very much a season of everyone waking up again from hibernating over the winter and taking a break. That's one thing I do love about the art world, not to go off on a tangent, but there are these like periods of downtime, which I really appreciate, and periods of rest. I mean, that's true in most industries, but I feel like it's really true in the art world where it's like a month or two at a time, particularly over the summer. I feel like things really quiet down, whether that be with summer hours or just longer exhibition schedules and whatnot. Just kind of gives everyone a little bit of a break just because it is so hectic. I think probably similar and adjacent to the fashion industry where you have these fashion weeks in the spring and the fall. You have all of these exhibits and all of these fairs, like the major fairs in the spring and the fall. And a lot of traveling, a lot of exciting things, but it's just a lot. And so January is pretty chill for the most part. I find that most galleries aren't starting their exhibits until mid-January, if not the end of January. So it just gives us all a little bit of a break, which is nice. However, last January, there are a couple of things I wanted to call out. The show by Ethan Cook at Nino Mir Gallery and their Soho location. I don't actually think their Broadway location in Tribeca had even opened at that point. I might be wrong, but they just had their Soho gallery. And this show by Ethan Cook, I really enjoyed. It's a nice contrast because if you look, I don't know if you can tell in the videos that I'll insert, but up close, the work is actually, it's textile work and it's woven. But I love how it's depicting these geometric shapes that are more reminiscent of minimalism. And usually when you think of minimalism, you know, you think of Ellsworth Kelly with, you know, paint and these color planes and minimal, right? There's not a lot going on in that regard. And that's really the statement they're making. But I love that Cook has combined textile with that minimalism, and it's just kind of a play on geometric minimalism, but with something that's traditionally more thought of as like craft. And yeah, I just enjoyed that. So fun juxtaposition there. And I loved the simplicity and the works of Ethan Cook. Devin B. Johnson was a part of a group show at Nicodeme Gallery in January, featured two other artists. I love Devin B. Johnson, so I really just want to call out his work here. He does a good job of like straddling abstraction with figurativism, in my opinion. It's kind of a hard line to walk, and I think he does a really good job with it. I love his use of color. And normally, I don't know if he's LA based, but Nicodeme is predominantly LA based. They have really great spaces in the old tire factory in downtown LA, and I love visiting their spaces. They have a couple in that building, but they just opened their New York space, I don't know, 1 or 2 years ago. And it's just nice to see an artist that I normally see only in LA in New York. So it's great to just be able to walk a neighborhood over and visit that show and see his works. Always a pleasure. A show that I want to call out that I normally wouldn't. You guys know, I don't know if you can tell by my content, but I love painting. I love abstract painting probably the most. I try to give a little diversity into what I'm sharing with you all, but like if I had my way, it would just be all abstract painting. Um, but I loved the show by Madeline Hollander at Bartolome Gallery. I hadn't seen any of her shows or any of her work since she collaborated with Urs Fischer at the Gagosian show a couple years prior. I think it must have been 2017, 2018, sometime like that. But I loved that show. I think it was called Play, and it had these like office chairs that were hooked up to this computer program, and they would like interact with each other as well as the viewers, kind of like dogs. Like they would run off and play together and then swirl, and you'd walk up to them and they kind of approach you, and then yeah, it was just like the coolest show that I'd been to. And she did the choreography for that. And I love that she doesn't come off as your traditional kinetic artist. I feel like all the kinetic artists that I've seen in the past, like Soto and whatnot, it's very like geometric shapes and plastics and stuff. And she really takes kinetic art to like another level, I feel like. And she really did that with this show, and I love it. She had two different types of sculpture that I'll insert the videos because it's hard to just describe them. But one of them was this really thick, kind of wire looped sculpture that looks like something you put in like a protein bottle to shake. Sorry, it's the only thing I can think of to compare it to. But in a classic kinetic art sense, you would walk around and it would kind of interact with you as a viewer, where it would move slightly based on, if you were kind of pushing the wind to make the metal become unbalanced, and then it would kind of have its own. You could also touch them, you could move them on your own if you wanted to. I know that's always like hard to know. I will say in exhibits, if you can touch the art, I wish the galleries would be more like, I don't know, letting you know that just because as a viewer, I don't know, maybe they do that on purpose because they don't want it to instill any damage or anything, and they don't want people to go crazy with it. But I do think that in general, you tend to not want to get in trouble. I do, at least. I don't want to get in trouble and like touch something I'm not supposed to. But it was only after I read the press release that they said you could touch it and whatnot. But anyway, so that was really great. The pieces that I really loved, though, were actually in the center of the exhibit, and they were these optical illusions. So when you looked at them, you thought it was like this 3D figurine that was kind of standing up, but it was really this reflection of this spinning object, and it was just really cool. I've never seen anything like it, and as you all know, I see a lot of stuff, so to see something that I had never seen before and to be surprised and delighted by it, I mean, that's always a great thing. So that was really fun. And then we went to Chelsea. I remember because it was so cold. Chelsea's great, obviously, for galleries. Everyone knows that. But when you go, because it's on the west side of New York, similar to where I am on the east side of New York, there's no blockage from the wind. And so you just have this, probably like Chicago, this cold water coming off, or cold air coming off of the water. And it's just going at you. And so I remember that day I wore a hat and earmuffs. I really wasn't, I do try to dress up, if I'm taking photos and stuff at galleries, but that day I was just like earmuffs, hats, like the wind was wild. But it was worth it because there were some really wonderful shows in Chelsea that I will never forget. There was the show at Pace Gallery by the artist Mika Tajima. And I forget specifically, I think, first of all, they're textile works and they're giant, which again, I love a textile work. It's a little bit different. And I love a huge artwork because like it just envelops all of your senses, I feel like, and gives you, in the same way that I'm sure you experience this overwhelming feeling of holiness when you walk into a place of worship. That's how like large artwork feels to me when it's done really well, is it just kind of envelops you and reminds you how small and insignificant you are as a human and how just wonderful creation is as a whole and how beautiful it can be. And so love a big artwork. Love that these were textile works. A really nice juxtaposition going on because they were textile works, but I believe that they were interpreting or depicting brain scans or like audio scans or something. And that kind of contrast between technology and, again, this textile thing that's usually associated with being handmade and with craft, I just thought was kind of a fun contrast. And then one of my favorite exhibits from January was at Nicola Vassal Gallery. And this was a really extensive exhibit. It actually took place in all three areas of Nicola Vassal Gallery. So she's got the front gallery space. This used to be Lisan, used to be there, and off of 10th Ave. And then there's the main gallery space, there's like a middle space, and then kind of a back room that's almost like a viewing room. And it took over all of it. It was actually the first show that I'd been to at this gallery where every single space was utilized and not as like a viewing room. And I loved that she had both these beautiful large works, but she also had a lot of smaller works. I know that, and this is just me guessing, I haven't like had any conversations with artists about this, but I'm sure it's hard as an artist because you want to think economically around what do my collectors maybe want or need, or what's going to be viable for them, and like on a commercial level. But then you also don't want to get too in your head about that, probably, where it's like dictating everything that you create. And I think there's a good balance. And I love when artists do create smaller works. We started seeing a lot of that more in the pandemic, I would say, when they weren't able to go into their studios and stuff, and they were creating things just in their apartments and whatnot, and they didn't have their assistants and things. And so, and you'll also see it where they'll use smaller works as studies for the larger works. But I do love when artists have smaller works because it does open up the ability for collectors of wider ranges to be able to procure their works, myself included. I started collecting with smaller works. I have a really small work by Claire Woods where I was able to afford that one versus normally her works would be 100,000 upwards sometimes, depending on the size of them, which, is out of my budget at this point in time. And so it's just nice. Also, from a practicality standpoint, if you are a New York collector or you just live in an apartment, not all of us have huge homes with big walls. In fact, I feel like I've reached peak baby collector at this point because I have paintings, unfortunately, that are just propped against the walls because I don't have anywhere to hang them right now. So when I can get a smaller work that I can kind of sneak into a different part of my house, that's always really nice. So anyway, I just love it when artists have smaller works that just opens them up to a wider range of collectors. But I love Elizabeth Schwager's works. She was a newer artist to me. I wasn't familiar with her work, but I love these interiors. They are Cecily Brown adjacent. I don't want to compare artists to other artists necessarily, but the way that she's capturing these interiors with this beautiful, rich color palette and her use of color and the textures and the detail, I just love them. I really, really, really love them. And I'm really excited to see where she goes with her career because I just thought the show was absolutely fantastic and I could just stare at these interiors forever. And it's cool to see a contemporary artist, younger artist, take on something like the interior, like the landscape, that's been done so many times and still do it in a way that's so fresh and interesting. I also think there's something so alluring about like the artist studio and a really beautifully done interior that will be drawn to, especially right now when many of us don't have beautiful homes and interiors to look at. I mean, I have a beautiful home, don't get me wrong, but again, an apartment is very different than a lot of what I'm trying to say is like the dream of a home that a lot of our parents had is not what my generation and below is experiencing. So being able to kind of dream through these works, I think is something that's really special and not to be discounted. And then the final show from January that I want to highlight was one that was on the Upper East Side. And I was so bummed because I didn't do a video or anything for the show because I wasn't allowed to record. That is a little pet peeve of mine. And you will see in my year in review video that sometimes I only insert pictures, and sometimes that's because I just didn't film, maybe, but also because if I wasn't able to film, I don't know why, but Gagosian, their 980 Madison location on the Upper East Side, they're very, very weird about filming and they won't let you film a lot of shows, which I find so incredibly annoying. So anyway, I'll just insert some photos and stuff, but I loved these works by Mary Weatherford. She is an artist. Again, if I had the budget, I would 100% collect her works along with Cecily Brown, Adrienne Guiney. They're just a few that I adore. And these works were incredible. They did not have her neon. I think it's hard as an artist because when she started playing with neon, like, what was that, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago now? I don't know the exact timelines, but I believe you probably don't want to pigeonhole yourself. So I do think it's smart of her to kind of play around without the neon a little bit as well. But these works were very ocean vibes to me, but not directly referencing the ocean, just her use of color. Again, it's Helen Frankenthaler adjacent, but not being so on the nose about it. It's not like you're walking into the show and saying like, oh, this is just like a Helen Frankenthaler wannabe. Like, I just love that she can reference Arte Palvera with the neon and, abstract expressionism with her various washes, but she does it in her own way that's really fresh and really interesting. So I really, really loved this show at Gagosian. Even though it was small, anytime there's a Mary Weatherford show, I'm there because I love her works. Now, February is by far one of my busiest months usually. So February and October, if you ever want to email me, I mean, I'm not going to lie, I'm not very good about responding to my emails and I apologize for that. But again, this is just something I do on the side right now. And so it is difficult for me to kind of get to everything in my spare time. However, if you email me in February or October, there are great chances that I will definitely not respond because it's just like the craziest month in terms of travel. It's a very exciting month for sure. So in February, I actually went to San Francisco for personal reasons. I went to Zonamaco in Mexico City, which I do every year when I'm able to, which is so exciting. And then I went to Freeze LA. And getting to see the shows in Mexico City and LA were fantastic. I will say they weren't quite as good as they were in 2023, in my opinion. I just felt like the shows were so good those years. They weren't bad, they just weren't as incredible as they were the year before. However, there were some really great shows that I do want to call out when I was in Mexico City, so I'll start with that. Proyectos Monclova in Polanco is one of my favorite galleries in Mexico City. It is, first of all, beautiful architecture, stunning space. I mean, the space alone is worth visiting, but the shows are always wonderful. There's usually always multiple shows. So there's like 3 different gallery spaces on each floor. And so it's nice to be able to see, multiple shows in one place, of course, if you're making the trip out to Polanco, depending on where you're staying in Mexico City. So that's always nice. And there were 3 really fantastic shows, but the one show that I want to highlight was by Eduardo Terrazas. And everything about the show was great, from like the entrance, like the giant beach ball, right? When you walk in, to all the beach balls out on the floor. The only caveat I will say is that in the press release, they talked about his connection to this balloon factory and whatnot, but they used beach balls instead of balloons. And I'm sure this was a tactical decision, or maybe it was a translation thing. I don't know, but they're beach balls. They're not balloons. So that kind of bothered me when I was looking at it. But the press release and the exhibit was commented on by Hans Ulbricht Overitz, which is fantastic. I mean, such a flex. So that was cool. It also prompted me to get his book, Conversations in Mexico, which is a great read. So yeah, wonderful show. I loved the contrast of, these industrial beach balls with, again, this like craft of Eduardo's textile works. The works, a little similar to Ethan Cook's, actually, in the January exhibit at Nino Mir. These works are very geometric, very meticulously created, but they are textile, which again is usually associated with craft and with this handmade, organic kind of quality. So the fact that there are these meticulous, sort of geometric shapes, but then in this organic material, I just love that contrast. Similar to someone like Vanessa German's work, her sculptures, if it's not meticulously executed, it can sometimes it could potentially come off as kitsch or leaning too much into the craft side of things. But because of the way that they execute on their works, it's just phenomenal. So yeah, wanted to call that out, but I loved that show. There's a couple of places that I always love visiting as well. Casa Wabi Sabino by Bosco Sodi. The space is by Alberto Calac, which is one of my favorite Mexican architects. It's a gorgeous space as well, and it's totally worth the trip out there. And there were 3 exhibits there, which were wonderful. Some of Bosco's own work is always there, but then also some emerging artists as well. That was really fun to visit. Lago Algo is another place that is by OMR Gallery, and I think another gallery is involved, or another institution is involved as well, but you can eat there. It's in the beautiful giant park, so it's really fun to walk through the park and then to see the exhibits and have a brunch or a nice dinner there. So that's always a nice thing to do, and it's super exciting. I think this is their 2nd show that they've had since they opened. Definitely always have to check that out in Mexico City. Other shows, 2 shows that I want to call out in Mexico City that I loved. The show at Maya Contemporary with Marcos Castro. I loved his references to 18th century Romanticism. I loved how they were very clear references, but not, again, so on the nose. I loved his use of color. I loved this room, which they were so gracious to let us come and see it and film, because it was actually taped off. It wasn't completely finished when we arrived. But this whole room that was really taken up by this dramatic mural, again, just sort of overwhelms your senses when you walk into it. So I really loved that show. And then the show at Marian Ibrahim Gallery, that was beautiful as well. I mean, anything in that space, I love that space. I love how it's like a bunch of different, you could have like 5 different gallery shows in that space, because it's like a lot of different rooms, which I'm sure is quite fun to curate and kind of play with each of them. And they did play with each of them in terms of the hang in each of the rooms. But the thing I loved about it too is there's this space. I love the gilded gold room, which is beautiful and was like the perfect place for the regalness of his portraits. But then in there's sort of like a conservatory space where there's a lot of windows, and then it's like half windows, half wall space, which I'm sure from a curation perspective can be really hard to work with. But I love how they actually played into that space by having stained glass. And again, stained glass is a more traditional method and just still really, really beautiful. I would love to see actually more artists play with stained glass, but it was lovely that they played with the strengths of that room as opposed to seeing that as a challenge. And then, yeah, having a stained glass work was really nice to see. So I did want to call that out. And then LA, I always say that it's very hard to make both Mexico City and LA work, but Freeze LA was really gracious in extending an invite to me this past year. So I was like, okay, I have to go, even though I originally wasn't going to, but I definitely can't go to Freeze LA this year. Unfortunately, I have an engagement that actual day, so I can't go. But yeah, there were some good shows in LA. Couple of my favorites to call out: the show at Hauser and Wirth, their West Hollywood space by Pat Steer. I love the space. I thought it was going to be hard to compete with their downtown LA space because it's so incredible. It's like a compound, I always referred to it as. This West Hollywood space, I love that it's got what a lot of the West Hollywood galleries do, and actually a lot of the downtown LA galleries. They have this sort of ship-like wooden ceiling, which I guess reminiscent from warehouses and stuff from that area. And you see it a little bit actually in the Chelsea warehouses as well. The old Mary Boone space had that. Paul Cooper Gallery has that. And it just makes for a cooler, more interesting environment as opposed to like just the white walls. To have the texture on the ceiling, I think is really great. But yeah, I love the space and I loved the works by Pat Steer. It was a bit of a bummer because my favorite works of hers were actually her really dark blue works that are harder to capture on camera. A lot of black and dark blue works pick up, especially with the iPhone, unfortunately, they pick up a little more yellowy. And so, yeah, they were just hard to kind of capture in all their glory, but the darker ones were my favorites from that show. And then another favorite of mine, which RIP to this Nino Mir gallery space, even though it is a great new space now from an emerging gallerist, Megan Mulrooney. If you're in LA, she took over Nino Mir's old LA spaces, which is wonderful because they were such incredible spaces. It would be really depressing for them to be like a Gap or something. Not that they would probably, but just love that another gallerist is taking those over. And of course, she worked for Nino Mir for a while. And so it was just kind of a beautiful way to pass off to someone of the younger generation to create an amazing gallery space. And she's definitely done that. But this was a show by Secundino, sorry if I'm saying this wrong, Secundino Hernandez. And I've been a fan of his works for a long time. He does these strictly abstract works with geometric shapes, but there's kind of this razorness to them, for lack of a better term, a little bit of a harshness to them, but still this organicness to them. And he's one that actually I would love to see in the studio to see how he gets these textures, because there is texture, but there's a cleanness to it as well. Anyway, I loved how these works were darker than what he usually does. I love that he incorporated black. Black is like a predominant color in these works, and then contrasting it with the brighter colors. It's hard to use black in art. I think some auction house gave some stats that said like black artworks sell, artworks that have black as a predominant color, and then they sell worse than other artworks, or they're harder to sell or whatever. I don't know. I actually, every single one of these I'm calling out, not that Pat Steer's were black, but they were, you know, dark blue. So close enough. But anyway, love the use of black and darkness. And then kind of on a similar adjacent note, Summer Wheat's show at Nazarian Kyrkio, that used to be Shulamit Nazarian. Her works always use a lot of black, which I love, and it's such a nice contrast to neon. I love how she uses this really unique technique of painting through like a window screen so that the works almost look like beaded. For the longest time, I actually thought they were beaded before I knew how she did them. But love her use of black. I really loved this exhibit. And I mean, any of her exhibits are great, so I wasn't surprised, but I just love when I can see her works in person. So that was always a joy to see her stuff in LA. I am concerned I might lose my voice by the end of this. I'm used to talking all day long. I normally have meetings, but I think it's different in meetings because I'm not talking the whole time like I am here, but this is good. I'm strengthening the vocal cords. So given how crazy busy February was, March was a little bit more chill. So I only have 2 shows that I want to talk about from March. And again, I don't know maybe it's because you don't see it a lot. I enjoy when I see it. Another exhibit featuring works where the color that is predominantly featured is black with these beautiful abstract shapes kind of coming out of it, even a little more minimal than the ones that we saw from Summer Wheat and from Hernandez in LA. And I'm talking about Mary Lovelace O'Neill's work at Marion Boesky Gallery. I adored this show. I mean, I love her works in general. So again, I'm not surprised, but I loved the scale of the works. I loved that there were multiple panels, and I loved the black expansiveness. I think it was also fitting that she created these works in Merida, Mexico, in her studio there. And I had just come from Mexico, so maybe I was feeling nostalgic and missing Mexico. But yeah, I really enjoyed this exhibit and thought it was a little something different from her, which is always kind of fun to see an artist do, but still very reminiscent of her gorgeous, abstract, slightly figurative works. So that was a really great show. And then, oh, the Frank Stella show at Jeffrey Deitch Gallery. This was such an amazing exhibit for many reasons. I mean, I think the most sad is that he passed away. The exhibit was in March. He passed away in May, so very shortly after this exhibit. Rest in peace, Frank Stella. So this exhibit was special for many reasons. It was special to me because it's rare. There's only a few spaces in New York that you can have sculptures of this size in a commercial gallery space. I mean, you can see them at institutions like Dia Beacon and whatnot, but again, those are like outside of New York, or they're in a major museum. Even the major museums like the Met and the MoCA, it's rare to see like huge, huge works like this. You can see them at certain Gagosian spaces, sometimes at Hauser, but really like it's very rare. So to see these 2 large, I mean, there were many large sculptures, but the 2 that were on the wheels in the very bottom floor of the gallery space, just overarching so high, and the organicness to these sculptures, it was almost kind of Frank Gehry-esque actually, in how organic they were. And I loved them. I loved the colors, the materials, how they just enveloped the space. They were just extraordinary and really, really, really wonderful to see in person. It's also exhibits like these that make me so happy that I started this channel, because to be able to capture sculpture in this 3-dimensional aspect on a video, it's just so much better than via just a photo. A photo can really only do so much. And so, yeah, I just felt like, what a joy was that exhibit. It was just so incredible. And then April, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I went to Chicago, which was fantastic. I'd never been to Chicago before. I think, of course, I really enjoyed the gallery spaces just because of the fact I had never been there before. It's kind of like meeting a friend, like someone that you know online, kind of like when I meet you guys in person, actually. If we don't really know each other, but like you've seen me, you've heard me talk, and then you see me in person, and it's just really wonderful to kind of put a name to a face. And I've seen these Chicago galleries, I've seen their booths at art fairs, I've seen their exhibits online on Instagram and things, but I've never seen their actual spaces. And I feel like a gallery space speaks so much to the gallery and their program, and it's just another kind of extension of their brand and their ethos. And so to see these spaces in person was such a joy for me, especially places like Marian Ibrahim. I've been to her galleries in Paris. I've been to her galleries in Mexico City. And so to see her original space in Chicago was really, really cool and really special. And Yeah, same with Gray Gallery. Like, what an amazing space in this huge warehouse. And same with Corbett versus Dempsey. And like, there's just all these spaces where I've listened to them on podcasts, and it was just so wonderful to see them in person. I mean, sometimes the opposite is true, where I had expectations of a gallery and then you see their space and it's kind of a little bit of a disappointment. So it can go both ways. I'm not going to highlight them on this channel because I'm not really about highlighting negativity, but that was, an aspect of it as well. But the thing that really blew me away was Chicago's institutions. The Art Institute of Chicago was just such an incredible experience. I was so lucky to be able to go twice. So I could take one pass and go through the wing with all the Van Goghs and see the Edward Hopper and just all of these incredible works from art history, and being able to see them in person is just it's like meeting a celebrity, you're like, oh my God, like I read about you in books as a child and now I'm getting to see you. So that was so fun. And the modern and contemporary wing and the bridge over from Centennial Park is just phenomenal. I mean, they talk about the bean, but come on, you guys, Centennial Park is insane. The Frank Gehry structure there is just out of this world, and the winding pathways, and the weather was phenomenal. I just had the best time, and the collection of contemporary and modern art was so beautiful. So many incredible Cy Twombly's and Helen Frankenthalers, and all of my favorites, as well as, the modern art, the surrealism, the Magrittes and the Dalis, and it was just great. I really enjoyed myself. I could go on about it for a long time. The art fair was also phenomenal. I don't know why people want to put down fairs. Not that people do. I mean, many people celebrate, fairs like Chicago Expo, but I think, they're like, oh, it's not Art Basel. Well, it's like, well, it's still a great fair. And I discovered a lot of great artists there, which is all you can really ask for. Like Austin Uzor, I discovered his work through Chicago Expo. So I'm very grateful for that, because I really, really love his work. And that's all you can want. That's also kind of where I kicked off procuring my Jana Schroeder. So, a fair it served all its purposes. I love that it was like right on the lake, and you could look out over the lake, which was Lake Michigan, which was really, really stunning. So I really had a great time in Chicago, and the institutions were incredible. Oh, one thing I want to call out too, the MoCA, the Museum of Contemporary Art, their survey with Nicole Eisenman was phenomenal. I love anything that brings together such a volume of works throughout an artist's career, especially when it's a younger artist like that, because it's so cool to see their evolution, even if it's over like a 20-year period, which in the scheme of art history isn't very long. It's so encouraging, in my opinion, to see how an artist evolves and see sort of what's impacted them at various points of their life, and then the directions that their artwork takes over time. Any artist should be going to surveys and retrospectives and things, and just, I hope finding that encouraging to just see where an artist comes from, and, how they've gotten to where they are today when she's super successful. I loved in the very beginning of the show, they had these old gallery posters, some of them of galleries that just don't even exist anymore. Again, there's that nostalgic factor of like, look at where she started, and then look at where she is now with this amazing museum show. So I really loved that survey, and the Museum of Contemporary Art was just beautiful all around. Other great shows as well. Okay, so April was a lot. February, it was, yeah, even if I only saw art in Q1 of 2024, I would have seen enough to nourish my soul for years. Like, I was so lucky to see so many things in 2024, but it definitely was a tiring year. An opportunity arose in May, which I will touch on in a second, but because it's May, I have to talk very quickly about Frieze, New York. I could talk about Frieze, New York for a while, and I will talk about Frieze, New York more this year in this format, but I like Freeze for the record. I love it in the shed. It is small. My only piece of feedback is, especially in the space where all the big hitters, like Hauser and Gagosian and James Cohen Gallery, it's very cavernous. It's the space that can be like the indoor-outdoor space that moves, and it's got, I don't even know how tall those ceilings are, like 100 feet maybe. But because it's a smaller fair, but then you have this huge open space, it's very quiet, especially on the VIP days, and it can feel really awkward for me personally. Let me know if you feel that way, if you visited Freeze, but every time I go, I'm just like, can you play like piano music or something? Like, can you play some jazz music? Like, I don't know, something to just set the vibe because it feels really awkward just like walking around in silence and you just feel like everyone can hear your conversations and anyway, but I wanted to call out, I really loved Pace's booth. I love the sculptures at that booth. I also loved the sterling rubies at Gagosian. Gagosian brings it every year. They have one of the best locations of booths. They always bring an incredible, usually it's a solo booth, and they just knocked it out of the park. I love Sterling Ruby. I love these particular works. So I really, really loved this booth. I also loved right across from it, James Cohen's booth of Elias Simier's work. Huge fan of his work, and it was really great timing. I mean, purposeful timing. Obviously, nothing is coincidence in the art world, but he was having an exhibit as a part of the 60th Venice Biennale, which kicked off in March of earlier that year. And so having a solo booth of his works was just a nice way to kind of celebrate that. And so that was fun to see those up close and personal. Also, I'm sorry if you can hear my stomach growling at any points. I'm trying to finish this video before I have lunch. it's not going well. Yes. So the opportunity that arose for me unexpectedly, which was so incredible, was being able to go to Stockholm for the first time for the Market Art Fair. But it wasn't just the Market Art Fair, it was actually a ton of programming that really highlighted everything going on around Art Week in Stockholm, and I was just blown away by every single part of it. So I wanted to touch on some of my favorites. Obviously, going to see the galleries, similar to my experience in Chicago, just like seeing galleries for the first time, except for many of these galleries and I had never heard of before. I think that the Nordic countries feels like it to me are a little more insular in terms of the art world. And so these were all brand new to me, and I was so blown away by the quality and just the difference in the spaces, and they were all quite easy to visit. They're clustered really conveniently. There's this one space where many are in this one building, but they still have their own uniqueness about them. It's not like you're in like a mall or anything like that. And so that was really great. I loved the Michael Johannesson show at GSA Gallery. I also loved the Katrin Vestmans there, as well as the Tony Cragg sculptures. But a lot of really incredible shows. I highly encourage you to check out my video of Stockholm galleries. They were just phenomenal. I think I actually had 2 videos, if I'm not mistaken. But it was really all the programming and then the actual art fair that itself that I was like so blown away by. The fair in general, phenomenal. So many, like I said, was exposed to so many wonderful Nordic galleries and artists that I'm now following along with their careers, which is always really fun. And I think the most unique thing, actually, because it was like the most surprising, I wasn't expecting it, was the Stockholm School of Economics, their art initiative. I think as someone who has a background in both art, but also technology, I really was kind of jealous, and I really appreciated the foresight that the leaders and the people behind the Stockholm School of Economics have in seeing the importance of art and of culture in general, and having a knowledge of that, especially in a contemporary context, having their future leaders like understand the importance of that, and then making sure that that's a part of their education, I just think is so unique. I mean, you barely even see that with actually even art schools, let alone, a school of economics. And so I was just blown away by their program. I was blown away by the art in their hallways. I was blown away by their art classrooms. Like it made me want to go there. It really did. So that was such a lovely surprise that I wasn't expecting and such a lovely experience. And I love talking about it because I just think it's such a cool thing that like I just never heard of before. And I wish that more schools, especially schools that aren't traditionally adjacent to the art world, would do things like this to really round out their curriculum and build leaders that are going to foster community and culture in a really responsible way. And I think the best way to do that is through understanding the contemporary art landscape, because, not to go off on a tangent, but art history is the real history. Like history can be manipulated in so many ways, and obviously art history can be as well. I mean, there's so many issues, with privilege and institutions being run by certain groups and wealth and yada yada. But I do think that the voice that an artist has can be so clear, and certain movements that evolve within history, they evolve for a reason, and they're so reflective of the emotional pulse and where society is at that given time, that I say that art history is like the real history and the honest history of what's happening at any given time, whether people writing the textbooks like it or not. This is what was going on. So anyway, that's a long tangent, but all of Stockholm was such a highlight. I really hope that I'm able to go back for another art week and enjoy it again, because yeah, it was so cool to visit and such a wonderful experience. And then I'm glad that I was able to come back in May and see a lot of the shows in New York that were open for freeze. That's the thing about New York, is a lot of the great shows happen in May and coincide with, the Armory show and Freeze New York. And this year was really no different. The shows in May, there were actually quite a few that I'd like to call out. I loved the Julian Schnabel show at Vito Schnabel Gallery. First of all, how cute and special is it to have your son become a gallerist in his own right, but then to be able to put on a show like this for his dad, I just think is great and really unique and quite special. But the show was really highlighting, if I can remember this correctly, his revitalization of painting. In a way, painting at that time was considered to kind of be dead. I mean, there's many times throughout history where different traditional things, whether that be just painting as a whole, sculpture as a whole, or like landscapes or portraits or realism or whatever. Vanitas works. There's all these different kind of themes that can become dead over time. And it's interesting to see artists kind of take those and then reimagine them in a new contemporary way. And the show is all about how Schnabel did that for painting. And he did that through things like his velvet paintings, which were really interesting, but also his plate paintings, which are my personal favorites. I just think they are so unique and so, just the textures and I could just look at them forever. I love these works. And then another artist who had a show that I think does a really great job of staying true to her style, but still experimenting with different ways of playing with her style, is Rita Ackerman. And her exhibit at Hauser and Wirth Gallery, where she split her picture plane, the show I think was called Splits, and she split the canvas into these kind of different quadrants and then had her abstract works divided out between them. And I loved that take on her works. I loved, again, her use of colors and the textures, and very synonymous with what she's always done in the past. But I just thought by dividing out the picture plane in that way, it was really interesting. So I loved that show. I loved the Hugh Hayden show at Lisan Gallery. Lisan's had a couple of that, and the Josh Klein show, not to skip ahead to later in the fall, but those shows really profound. They utilized the gallery space in a way that wasn't kitschy or gimmicky. Like sometimes you can transform the gallery space and it doesn't land. And as more and more galleries start to do this, I think it's becoming slightly less novel. But when you can do it in a way where it really is additive to the exhibit and not performative, then I think it works really well. And I think that for this show with Hugh Hayden, it worked very well because it was by having the bathroom stalls and then having the works kind of tucked away in the bathroom stalls, it was such a really clear and nice way to talk about these themes of, you know, interior, exterior, public and private, and sharing and, you know, hiding. And I think anyone, you don't have to have a degree in art to walk in and kind of understand the show, even without reading the press release. And I do love shows that are quite clear like that. And so loved that Hugh Hayden show. And then I loved the Amy Sillman show at Gladstone Gallery. I don't have a lot to say about it because I just love her works. And there are just certain artists that I have on my love list. Maybe I'll do a whole video about the ones that I love, but her and like Cecily Brown and Mary Weatherford, they're just artists where Jenny Brosinski, when there's a show of theirs, like I'm there. Like doesn't matter. And I adored the show. I loved her use of color and line and texture, and yeah, beautiful show from Amy Sillman. I loved two shows at Pace that I want to call out. I loved Adam Pendleton's show. I loved the setup of the show. It was very maze-like. He took the room, which was it's a very expansive room, and divided it. And I loved the black walls with then his traditional black and white works that he normally does with the black dada, but then also incorporating sort of new colors into it. I thought it was really interesting. And then upstairs, Tara Donovan's show that she made out of CDs, similar to artists that I mentioned, like Vanessa German and actually even Vito Schnabel a little bit with his plate paintings, but Eduardo Terrazas in Mexico City. The execution element, and Liza Lau actually to a little bit too with her beaded works, the fact that these works are executed so meticulously in this everyday material is what is so fascinating to me. And I don't think if they were executed so flawlessly, like she always does with her works and her attention to detail, I don't think she'd be as successful. But they're just so beautifully done. She elevates this everyday material like a CD-ROM and takes it to a place where it becomes art in an unexpected way. And yeah, her ability to do that in a non-gimmicky way is just so applaudable and so interesting. I love Tara Donovan for that and all of her works, whether it be her screen works or her coffee stirrers, or she's just so innovative with different materials, and you just know when you're going to go see a show of hers, like what you're getting in the best way.